evening, everyone. It is just about 5 o'clock in the evening on September 21st, 2019, and we are back to do a head-to-head comparison. I haven't done a head-to-head in quite a while, so today's comparison is going to be between the DT1990 Pro and the Sennheiser HD700. A couple of people have asked for this, so it needed to be done, and so today we're going to do it. We're going to talk specifically about the bass response, because as you know, I like to take things slow and provide you as much detail and explanation about what headphones are doing as I possibly can, because I think that is the most helpful way of giving you information so that you can make a decision which one to buy. All right, so we have our test playlist. The songs that we're going to test today are Mountains by Hans Zimmer, Angel by Massive Attack, and Drum Solo by Jack Bruce and Simon Phillips. All of these are available on my test playlist on Spotify, so feel free to follow my Spotify playlist. Okay, so here we go. The first one we have is the HD700, and let's start with Mountains. I have the headphones plugged into an A/B switch, which itself is plugged into the MyTech Brooklyn DAC Plus. This is an amplifier DAC that I have not yet used on this channel, and I figured I should use it now. Very, very low distortion, extremely crystal clear, wonderful reference class amplifier and DAC. I am currently at negative 24 decibels on the HD700. The rumbling in this song is not particularly elevated. I can hear it, but I think that, I have to pump up the volume, which is kind of weird because these are 150 ohm headphones, and it shouldn't require me to pump as much volume into them to get a response for the bass. So let's try that. Let's try to bring it up from negative 24 to about negative 15. Okay, now we're at negative 15, and the bass has slightly better reproduction, but it's still not ear-shattering. The ear cups are not shaking. Let's move to halfway of this song where everything is at its crescendo. And the organ should come in any second now, and what I want to know is if the organ has this rattling sensation to produce that sub-bass. And I wouldn't say it has a rattling sensation at all. It's very crystal clear. It is very fast. It doesn't seem to interfere with any other frequencies. Good separation between the organ and some of the string instruments. Very good soundstage, left and right. It sounds like you're standing outside a big field and these giant loudspeakers playing at you. Good separation of all the instruments. Although not hyper detailed, there's still a lot of treble energy I think that is missing in some of the instruments. It still sounds fairly clean and clear, but that sub bass really isn't present. So part of the problem is that, at negative 15 decibels, that's very, very loud. And you should be able to hear the song now on the recording. And even with that loud reproduction or loud volume, the bass isn't emphasized, right? It's pretty, you could say it's neutral, but I think it's probably a little shy of neutral. I think that it's a little bit recessed, rolled off in the bass frequency, where you're not really hearing the rumble. Now, you might say, well, that's distortion. Why would you want to hear that? And the answer is, it's not distortion. That's part of the song. The way that this song was mixed is with that giant organ in this big church. And it has this rumbly, earth-shattering noise. That is the organ. And if you're not hearing something like that, then clearly there's something missing in the sub-bass region. And as far as the HD700 goes, I'm not quite getting that experience. In fact, I'm getting the opposite. I'm getting kind of a flatter representation of the organ, even at its crescendo when it's playing the hardest. And I'm getting it not interfering with anything, which is good. I don't want it to interfere with anything, but on the other hand, I also want it to have a lot of resonance, and I want it to have, a bit more body to it. So it sounds like there is actually an organ right next to you. The way that it's represented on the HD700 is like I said, you're standing outside in the field with these giant loudspeakers, and you're going to hear it, obviously, but it's not the same thing as standing right next to the organ. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, so let's now switch to the 1990. And you got to bear with me as I do this, because I have cables going everywhere. All right, so I've got the 1990s on my head. I'm going to bring down the volume. So the volume is now at -26. And by the way, the Brooklyn DAC Plus, yeah, it comes with an Apple remote, and it works with the Apple remote. It's fantastic. And every amplifier in DAC should have a remote that comes with it, so you can lean back and start just changing volume and all these other settings. Oh, so fantastic. Anyway, here we go. Back to mountains on the 1990. -26 decibels, very muted. These are 250 ohm versus 150 ohm on the Sennheiser. And I'm going to tell you right about where the two volumes were about the same when I first started out. So on the Sennheiser, it was -25, and on the Beyers, it's -19. It's fairly close to what they started out as, the Sennheisers did. I'm going to increase to -10. And -10 is approximately equal volume to -15 on the Sennheisers. Immediately you know that the Beyers are more closed off than the Sennheisers. You don't get that big airy presentation, but in exchange, what you do get is substance, right? It sounds more intimate, number one, I mean, in comparison to the Sennheiser. But not only does it sound more intimate, but the bass has a slight bump, just a tiny bit more than on the 700s. I'm going to skip to halfway of this song. The crescendo is about to hit with the organ and all the instruments. I'm going to increase the volume again to -8. And here comes the crescendo. Yep, definitely. Absolutely. Okay, I don't need to keep listening. I'm telling you, the sub-bass reproduction on the 1990 is demonstrably, noticeably, effectively better than on the 700. And by better, all I mean is that it's boosted in comparison to the 700. Where the 700 just has a much more flat reproduction of the bass, the 1990 has a much slightly more elevated reproduction. Now, here's the thing. I think I said previously that the 1990 is bass anemic in a way, and it is in comparison to other headphones. So now we're walking backwards. Now we're comparing the 1990 to a headphone that really isn't bass heavy at all, like the 700. So in comparison, the 1990 turns out to be, really bassy with the 700 as the competitor. What the trade-off here is that with the 700, you really do get that separation. But with the 1990, with the slightly more bumped up bass in comparison, there's a slight melding of frequencies between the bass and then the other frequency. It's not significant. There's still good separation, but it's not the same type of separation. It's certainly not to the same degree as on the 700s. One of the ways I explain the difference in sound character is the 700 is just more airy, hands down. Much more soundstage, much more width and verticality. And the 1990 is more closed off. And so that closed off experience not only makes it seem as if the frequency is more boosted, but it also makes it easier to hear it because it's not dissipating, it's not resonating out, it's not decaying out into the ether, so to speak, like it does on the 700, figuratively speaking, obviously. Okay, so now we're going to switch back to the 700, and we are going to Angel by Massive Attack. And here we go. Volume is back at negative 24. And it's very, very precise bass. Like the drum hit is tick, tick, tick. It's just very clean, clear, precise. Great soundstage. There's this cymbal instrument that comes in early in the song, probably around 20 seconds, 18 to 20 seconds. And it's only in the left ear cup. And it just kind of fades away. Quite separate from everything else. Going to increase the volume to negative 20. And at negative 20, you can really hear the very precise, fast drum hits. That sub-bass rumble that's in the song is fairly light. It's not interfering with anything. You can certainly hear it, but it's not boosted by any stretch of the imagination. You can hear the layers of the bass. You've got the sub-bass, you've got the drum, and then there's probably a bass guitar that's also playing the strumming. And those three layers are quite well separated. When the male vocalist comes in right about now, you can hear him very clearly. Everything else is also very clearly audible separately. Okay. So let's switch to the 1990, and I will tell you exactly what I hear as a difference. All right, now I've got the 1990 on my head, and here we go again. Volume is still at negative 20. I'm going to increase to negative 15, and immediately you hear that the sub-bass is much more pronounced on the 1990 than it was on the 700. But the headphone is also much more closed off, significantly less airy than the 700. In comparison to the 700, the bass on the 1990 is vastly different. You can just sit here, you can almost start hearing the rumbliness, the true rumbliness of the sub bass. Still no distortion. But the separation between the sub bass and the drum is less precise, meaning there's a slight melding, ever so slight melding of the two frequencies. Certainly not as airy, and it's not as precise. So the drum hit is not as quick as it was on the 700, whereas the 700, you hit that drum hit, it goes tick, 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 just one after the other, whereas with the 1990, it's tick, it sounds like that, right? You hit the drum on the top of the head, there's a lingering sound signature, and then you hit the next one, there's a lingering sound signature. Just very slight. I will also say that the vocal is not as cleanly separated on the 1990 as it is on the 700. Part of that is because the intimate nature of the 1990, and because of that slighter boosted bass in comparison to the 700. So the 1990 has a warmer presentation overall, right? The 700 has this really open, airy character, which I don't think anybody is going to dispute if they've ever heard the 700. Whereas the 1990, because of its more closed-off nature, is simply providing a vastly different listening experience on the same songs. That's an interesting feeling to have, right? If you have one pair of headphones that is just open and airy, and then you put on a different pair of headphones that is more closed off and has a slightly different presentation of the frequency, you're essentially listening to two different mixes of a song at the same time, right? You have one, and then you put on the other, and now you've got a different mix of the song, essentially. And that is a very cool experience to have. Having said that, I people keep saying that the 1990 is an open back headphone. It's not fully open back. It's semi-open back headphone. And because of its semi-open back headphone nature, it's also semi-closed. And that semi-closedness of the headphone means that you are going to get some of the same characteristics of a fully closed back headphone, meaning a slightly different bass response, more resonance, more lingering of some of the frequencies compared to a fully open back headphone. Does that kind of make sense? And I think that's part of the reason why we're hearing some of these differences between the headphones. Okay, so let's switch back to the 700. And with the 700, let us now go to Drum Solo by Jack Bruce and Simon Phillips. Here we go. The drum is, again, very, very fast. And you can actually hear the drum just falling out like boing, boing. As the drummer hits the top of the drum head, you can hear the air being pushed down. So you get this boing sensation. Almost peaky with the way that the drum is being represented, but still well under my threshold. Volume is at negative 14 right now. I'm going to increase to negative 10. And at negative 10, the cymbals are really, really energetic, let's just say. Not ear-piercing, but very close. And that drum, oh my God, it is so precise. It is like you're standing right next to the drum as the drummer is beating on it. It is a visceral response. Just fast, no lingering resonance. Each drum strike is its own character, right? So you have one drum hit, then you have the next one, and then you have the next one. You know it every single time when the drum is hit. So there's no melding of that frequency. Very good representation left and right. So you can pinpoint like where one drum head is, where the other drum head is, left and right as he's just beating on the drums. You can pinpoint slight differences in the position of the drum. Okay, I'm going to bring it back down to negative 20. So it's just mind-blowing how an open back pair of headphones like the 700 can reproduce drum strikes in this way on this song so very sharply, precisely, fast, almost visceral. Now, I've said that word before when describing headphones. The ZMF Atticus is visceral. The audeze XC is visceral. Is the 700 the same visceral type? Not quite the same. Not quite the same. But for an open back pair of headphones, high volume like this on this song, my God, that is one of the most jarring, in a good way, drum songs you could hear with a pair of headphones like the 700. Now, in comparison, like we heard the other songs, and I said, oh, look, the bass isn't all that well represented. It's not boosted. But why is it so precise with this? Well, because the energy really here, most of it is coming from the treble. As the drum is hit, that sharp spike is the treble energy. I could hear the drum, bottom of the drum falling out like boing, boing. I heard that. It wasn't pronounced. It wasn't elevated, but I heard it. Part of the reason I heard it, I think, is because the 700 are really open and airy, and that resonance, that character, that sound signature does, in fact, carry through. All right? So now let's switch to the 1990. Oops. Got my headphones stuck on my chair. Okay. We have the 1990, and let's restart. Oops. My mouse is doing something strange. Let's restart now. Here we go. Automatically, you know that it's much more closed off. That shouldn't be a surprise at this point. I'm going to increase the volume to negative 10. We were at negative 20, by the way. The drum strikes sound a little bit more muffled on the 1990 than on the 700. Almost like there's, I don't know, like a thin sheet over the drum heads. What is far more hurtful, however, are those cymbal strikes. Ouch. Okay, so this is the treble spikes people were talking about. Like at a really high volume, those cymbals start really just kind of shoving themselves inside your eardrum. Whereas with the 700, not quite the same. I mean, the energy was there. It was just a little bit pulled back. And maybe that's the difference between the volumes a little bit or something like that. But frankly, with the 1990, the thing that really strikes you is the cymbals, not so much the drum. The drum is much more closed off because of the more closed off nature of the 1990. Let's keep listening to it, though. I don't hear the boing boing, right? Like the drum dropping out of itself. Like the sound boing boing as the drummer hits on top of the drum head and pushes the air down. That's not quite represented on the 1990. The drum hit is fast, but I think that because there's less air in the song, there's a bit more delay in dissipating the strike, so it slightly melds into the next drum strike. Not quite as good at separating the different drum strikes that occur one after the other. I can tell you, I just put my hand on the ear cup, and it's shaking just a little bit, which the 700 wasn't. So I'm going to go back to near the beginning, and I want to listen for that drum strike, original drum strike, when it starts. Here we go. Yeah, the drum falling out of itself like a boing sound. It's not really represented on the 1990. It's close, it gets there almost, but it's not the same as on the 700. There's a very clear difference, at least in my opinion. Okay, so let's talk conclusion. For the bass, which of these is better? Oh, that's up to you. I can't answer that question for you. I have no idea which bass is better. I couldn't tell you today. I won't be able to tell you tomorrow. What I can tell you is that it's down to your flavor, your preference, how you like your music to be represented. The 700 is, hands down, more airy than the 1990. The 700, I think, for every song is probably going to give you a slightly more subdued bass response than the 1990. The difference is when it will outperform the 1990, I suppose, with some bassy songs, it's with songs like Drum Solo, where the drum is the only instrument, the drum kit. Because all that energy is the treble spikes that come in. It's much more precise, much more visceral, I think, than on the 1990. Now, when I say much more, it's a matter of degrees. It's not like 900% more. It's not 50% more. It's 5-10% more visceral, more impactful, more articulate than on the 1990. The 1990 does a very, very good job, I think, of reproducing the bass in comparison to the 700. You get more sub-bass energy out of the 1990 than you do on the 700. But in exchange for that, you also get slightly less, not as good, not better, slightly less separation of the instruments. So the separation isn't fantastic, isn't amazing. It's just, there's some separation for sure, but it's not a lot of separation, not hyper separation. There's not a distinct hard line difference between instrument 1 and instrument 2 and instrument 3 and so on and so forth. Whereas with the HD700, you are much more likely to get those types of hard line differences. And I think I said this before when I concluded with my 1990 video, which is the 1990 is good. It's better than average. It does everything well. It just doesn't excel at any given thing, and that remains to be the case. But when you look back and forth between this and the 700, if you're looking for something that is a bit more bassy, just a degree more, right? Not uber bassy, not like Beats, just a degree or two more bassy, then the 1990 is the one out of these two. But if you're looking for a headphone that is a little less on the bassy side, just by a matter of small degrees, but has better separation all throughout, then the 700 is the one to probably pick out of the two. I hope that this has been helpful. I hope that if you have been concerned or worried or questioning which one of these two to purchase, if you had the opportunity, then maybe this bass response test will provide you the information that you need to help make that decision. I would ask that if you are a regular watcher, a viewer of my channel, that you might consider donating to me on Patreon. Every little bit counts, and every little bit helps. I currently have 6 wonderful, giving, amazing patrons who have decided to give me a little bit of their money, hard-earned money, once a month, every month. And if you could join in, just donate $2 a month to me, that would still help me considerably, and I would truly appreciate it. Those of you who are regular viewers but haven't subscribed, hey, maybe you'll think about subscribing to my channel. If you have any questions, concerns, comments, please leave them in the comments section below. If you want me to review a product, please let me know through the request form in the description below. Now, remember, when you're requesting it, look at the equipment list that I have, which is linked into the request form. That's the stuff that I have and I can review. If you're asking me stuff I don't have, it's not going to get reviewed until I actually get it, which might be quite some time. Which is why, hey, if you join me on Patreon, then I can probably get that stuff a little bit faster. Thank you so much. I hope all of you have a wonderful weekend. I hope that you have a pleasant evening and that you can enjoy what is left of your weekend. Take care.